But he had, if I recall, Timothy circumcised, but he didn't have Titus circumcised. Titus was a Gentile. Timothy's mother was Jewish. So it's clear that he has Jewish.
But Paul doesn't make that claim, does he?
Yes, he does.
Where?
He goes. It's an Acts. Oh, you're okay. I got you.
Oh, he didn't write Acts.
I got you. You're okay.
Okay,
I can
John.
hear you.
All right, you're live on the air. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Okay, thank you. How you doing, Rabbi? I have a question for you. So going kind of piggybacking off your first conversation, when you were talking about testaments between the Quran and the New Testament and the Torah, when Paul was writing his letters, do you agree that he was not thinking that he was writing a new Bible?
Yes. I think he saw problems in different churches, generally that he established, not always, but usually, and he was addressing all kinds of issues and problems that were going on in churches. Yeah. He didn't think he was writing a Bible.
So, and also there was people back then who didn't understand him, like 2 Peter 3 says, there are some things in that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable twist their own destruction as they do the other scriptures. So if he was misread in the first century, don't you think, and I'm going to get to my question, but don't you think there's the possibility of even, like we discussed last time, I was going to use the word Christianity because that wasn't around, but we'll use it for just semantics at this time in history, that he wasn't going around establishing a new religion. He was predominantly talking to Gentiles. His issue was that Gentiles did not need to be circumcised, but he did require Jews to remain faithful to the Torah. So that misunderstanding comes into who is he talking to in his audiences.
Let me just say this. I don't accept your premise at all. I don't believe that 2 Peter was written by Peter. I mean, I don't believe that. I'm sure you do as a Christian. Please don't take offense at that. Not many New Testament scholars think that 2 Peter was written by Peter. But regardless, I don't think he was misunderstood at all. In fact, I think Paul was the easiest to understand. He's much more clear in his message than the Gospels. It's not really clear, and I think you might agree with me on this. Although Paul, you're using circumcision as an example of just being antinomian against ritual commandments. Although Paul is very clear about that. You say for Gentiles, but Paul says the same thing to Jews in Romans 7. The Gospels are not that clear. So I would say that, if I were to ask you, reading the book of Matthew, does a Jew or Gentile have to keep the commandments? It's not clear. The Sermon on the Mount might persuade you that you have to keep the Sabbath, that you have to keep all the ritual commandments. It's the Gospels the stories are very well formed, very easy to read and understand, but the theology that you take from it is not quite clear. Like, is the Eucharist, transubstantiation as the Catholic Church? They've got to, they have John 6. So I would say that Paul's letters are very easy to understand, and it is true, I'll concede this point, that it's not really a concession, it's a claim that later Christian writers that contribute to the Christian canon, like the book of Acts, like 2 Peter, are trying to solve a problem in that because there was such friction between Peter and Paul, as an example, they had to basically convey that everyone is on the same page. You quoted 2 Peter 3, so I would go to 2 Peter 3:16. You're familiar with that. So I think Paul felt that no Jew could be saved by ritual commandments. Although he was mostly speaking to Gentiles, he wasn't exclusively speaking to Gentiles. And I think Paul's very easy to understand.
See, my pushback would be, and whoever wrote 2 Peter is beside the point. The point is that there's people that just misunderstand him. But he had, if I recall, Timothy circumcised, but he didn't have Titus circumcised. Titus was a Gentile. Timothy's mother was Jewish. So it's clear that he has Jewish people.
But Paul doesn't make that claim, does he?
Yes, he does.
Where?
He goes. It's in Acts. Oh, you're okay. I got you.
Oh, he didn't write Acts.
I got you. Okay.
So, but why doesn't he say that? Work this through. Why doesn't he say that? Why is it he that's not saying he circumcised Timothy? Why is it someone in at least the late 80s saying that? The answer is obvious, that it's a later accretion in order to explain away a problem that comes up in the book of Acts. Is there people are saying about you, Paul, that you don't feel you have to keep the law. This is a problem that the church has to solve in the first century, is people going, there are different Christologies here, which one is correct? The work of Acts is to say everyone's on the same page.
Well, 1 Corinthians 7:17 says, to those that are circumcised, you remain circumcised, and to the uncircumcised, you remain uncircumcised. So he's not telling people not to get circumcised. Is in 1 Corinthians written by Paul?
Yes, it's an indisputed letter of Paul, but he's just saying you don't have to go through the medical procedure of re-uncircumcising yourself. But Paul makes it very clear, read Romans 7, he's speaking to Jews, that you don't have to keep the law any longer. He does say in 1 Corinthians, same book, but 2 chapters later in verse 20, 21, 22, that he speaks a certain way to Jews and he speaks another way to Gentiles. And he becomes all things to all men. Paul was highly chameleon, and whatever he had to be, he was to whatever audience. And those places in the Christian Bible where you find Paul carrying out rituals, which you will find it. You'll find it in non-Pauline letters or non-Pauline books, like the book of Acts. 2/3, for those who don't know this, because the book of Acts is called, it's not deceptively, but it's deceptively, it's called the Acts of the Apostles, right? But it really isn't. It's really a story about Paul, who occupies 2/3 of the book. He's the hero of 2/3 of the book of Acts. And the whole point of it is everyone's on the same page. Now, why is there this pushback? And why do you have Second Peter 3, which is trying to say it's all scripture, we're all the same? Because they weren't all the same. And to say that, and one other point about Paul's view of keeping commandments, Paul viewed the keeping of commandments, this is very critical, and I hope you pay careful attention to this, was that the commandments had no intrinsic value. They were only a shadow, his words in Colossians 2:16, 17. The essence is Christ. And in Galatians 3, Paul makes it very clear, verse 24, that the commandments are only a taskmaster, which means that the whole reason there were ever commandments in the Torah, why put them there to begin with, is to get you to be aware that you're a sinner, then believe in Jesus. It had no intrinsic value for anyone. So Paul does not say, that many people are under this apprehension, it's completely incorrect. I think people are attracted to this idea because we don't want to think bad things about Paul. We want to think they meant well. You know, we try to judge people by our own behavior, and we just hope that, you know, maybe Joseph Smith was delusional. You know, we just hope he was. So people think that, well, Paul really was saying something authentically Jewish, and that is non-Jews don't have to keep ritual laws. They only have to keep the 7 Noachide laws. And it's Jews that still have to keep the Torah, but that's not correct. He is saying that the ritual commandments are a shadow. They have no intrinsic value, and they are only there to get you to realize that you're a sinner and then turn to Christ. And that's precisely the message that Paul conveys in Romans chapter 7, where he's addressing his own brethren, Jews in Rome, who he says, your relationship with the Mosaic law is basically like the relationship that a woman has with her now deceased husband. Your marital bond is gone. And then he tells the story of himself that before he knew about the law, he thought he was okay. When he discovered the law, then he knew he was a sinner. And so the law has no intrinsic value. This is straight Paul. And I would convey the obvious, and that is that if we only had the 4 Gospels and he had nothing else, it'll be very, you would not be able to easily come up with most Christologies. It would be very hard because Paul's influence, I mean, the church fathers believe that 14 out of the 27 books in the New Testament were written by Paul. It's an astonishing influence. Moreover, Paul has very little history in it. Like there's almost no storytelling, and with a little bit of quotes from Jesus in 1 Corinthians, he almost never quotes Jesus, or tells anything about Jesus or his ministry or his life or his, that the women were at the tomb. None of the storytelling. That's all over the gospel. So no, it's the gospels that are inconclusive, and Christians really are aware of theology because of Paul and later developments by church doctors and church fathers throughout the patristic period, going all the way up to Augustine and further. Augustine probably the most influential of all. And they're going to shape the doctrines of the Christianity that you now adhere to. So Paul is not complicated at all. It's complicated to read the Sermon on the Mount. And in case you doubt what I'm saying, look how Christians fight over Matthew chapter 5. Are you supposed to keep the Sabbath? Not supposed to keep the Sabbath? I assure you there are Christians out there that believe that you have to keep all the commandments because of the Sermon on the Mount. I assure you of that. And then there are other Christians that have these torturous explanations of why Matthew 5:17 doesn't mean what it seems to mean. I assure you there's huge arguments within Christendom, pages and pages filled with the arguments among Christians of how to understand the Gospels. They have very little question about how to understand Paul. Thank you for your question. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל